This is Ankapsu, and now we're going to talk about BRICS Pay, which is going to be like the global PIX for everyone. Look at Brazil getting more and more entangled with the BRICS. I'm telling you, this is dangerous. It's dangerous because this isn't going to change anything in a positive way for Brazil, but at the same time, it could make our relationship with the United States worse, right? So here it is. Look, several pages talking about it, left-wing pages, right? This click Petróleo e Gás is from the Oil Workers Union, so this is leftist, right? O Cafezinho is also talking about it here. No, BRICS is launching its own PIX, it's the global PIX and whatever, because PIX is going to replace SWIFT. Let's understand this case here because I'm going to explain to you why it's not going to happen, why it won't replace it. This is just bluster from people trying to say they're going to stand up to the United States. It certainly has a lot of appeal for anti-American folks, the leftists here in Brazil, but it definitely doesn't stand a chance of working. And worse, it could end up pushing us even further away from the civilized Western world, right? This news was suggested by Peter de Patinete at the Playground Menos Estado Mais Você and several other people. Thanks to everyone who suggested news on our website, visãolibertaria.com. And thank you for watching our video. If you like our content, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, okay? So what is BRICS Pay? According to what they're explaining here, look, they say here that the idea is BRICS is speeding up the implementation of the payment system, which could transform global trade and reduce the historical dependence on the dollar, right? So the whole story is this. They're talking about an international PIX, but it actually has nothing to do with PIX. That's just more propaganda they're putting out, right? To say it's like PIX and all that. PIX, which was created during the Bolsonaro administration and all that, really caught on here in Brazil, and people are saying it's like a global PIX, but it's not. It's more like a SWIFT. They want to replace SWIFT. SWIFT, for those who don't know, is an international association of banks headquartered in Belgium, but mainly controlled by the United States, and it allows for international debt transactions. It's extremely important and works very well. If you want to send money to the United States or actually anywhere in the world, you can make these transactions through SWIFT, right? Nowadays, SWIFT has become less important because cryptocurrencies are being used a lot for this purpose. This is another point that simply shows how useless this kind of thing is, right? Here, look. The idea is simple on paper, but complex to execute. To create a platform that allows commercial transactions between BRICS members to be settled directly in national currencies, avoiding conversion into dollars or euros. And again, notice here that they want to de-dollarize, they want to remove the dollar. This runs into the same problem I mentioned to you before. No one asks you to sell or buy something from China and use the real to carry out that transaction. The only requirement you need is that both sides of the transaction agree to it. But what's the problem that happens in this case? If you, for example, decide to do the transaction in reais, then the party in China will receive reais. How can they spend those reais? They can't spend reais in China. They can't spend reais in Europe. They can only spend reais with Brazil. And then you end up in a situation where you have a bunch of that currency and nothing to do with it. And there's no way to convert that currency. There's no one to sell it to, no one to give it to. In other words, in the end, you end up with a problem. Russia and India tried this, selling oil and gas and paying in rupees, right? India paid Russia in rupees for the oil it bought from Russia. This was at the beginning of the war. So what happened? They stopped with the scheme. Why? Because Russia started accumulating a bunch of rupees and had nothing to do with them. They could only spend them in India, but India didn't have anything, no product that was interesting at that level, right? At that volume of money that Russia could buy. So you see, you end up in an impossible situation. That's why people use the dollar, because you can spend the dollar anywhere in the world, everyone accepts the dollar. So this whole thing, this fantasy of making transactions in any currency is simply nonsense. You end up needing to have a global currency to do that. Now, what they're talking about here isn't even the currency itself. It's the payment system replacing SWIFT, right? Here, look, BRICS Pay is a decentralized financial messaging and settlement system inspired by solutions like China's CEPS and Russia's SPFS, but with the proposal to connect all members of the bloc. And that's what I'm telling you. Look, that's why there's no chance this will work. You don't need another system to do this. The system already exists. If the issue is moving away from the dollar, you could use China's CEPS or Russia's SPFS, which have already been around for quite a while. And why don't these systems take off? For the same reason the BRICS currency doesn't take off, because there's little adoption. You end up with something limited. That payment system only works in those few countries. In the end, these systems end up falling victim to the same network effect that today makes the dollar the main currency. Most people already accept the dollar, so it's better to do transactions in dollars. Everyone benefits from doing a transaction in dollars. You can spend dollars anywhere in the world without any problem. The BRICS currencies you'll only be able to spend among BRICS members. People will always prefer to do things in dollars to have more freedom in the end, right? Here, look, this system would work as a secure channel for banks, companies, and governments to make international payments using currencies like the Real, Yuan, Rupee, Ruble, and other BRICS currencies, right? And again, it falls into the same problem. The BRICS currency is more limited, it's worth less. In the end, if given the choice, people will always prefer to make transactions in dollars between the 2 points, right? You might ask, but why is SWIFT more widely used? Why is the dollar more commonly used in the end? And the situation is very simple. It's because, in reality, the United States is the largest economy in the world and the most stable economy in the world at this moment, right? It's a democracy, there's a changeover of power. The previous government was Biden, now it's Trump. We don't know who the next government will be, but they tend to maintain this consistency from an economic standpoint. I'm not saying they're perfect, no. They're also printing a ton of money. They also do a lot of stupid things with their economy over there, but they tend to maintain this stability much more than China and Russia. Look at Russia, getting destroyed in a war over there, completely ruining itself, throwing their economy in the trash. And Brazil wants to help Russia. Because make no mistake, the country that benefits the most from this whole thing about alternative payment systems to SWIFT, other currencies and so on is not Brazil, it's Russia. Brazil actually, look, gets nothing out of this, gains nothing from it, at least for now, no. It's possible that if this game with the banks continues, of not wanting to apply Magnitsky here to Alexandre de Moraes here in Brazil, it could be that in the future we might also be excluded from SWIFT, but I don't think that's something that would happen quickly. It's not very likely that this would happen, right? But today, this would only benefit Russia, and that's why I find it so strange that Lula is defending this whole BRICS Pay thing so much. I don't know what. It's an anti-American sentiment, isn't it? They're trying to hit on this here. It's not just that, look, people are saying here no, because Brazil, Russia, and China are joining forces behind the scenes and raise a global alert for billionaires' deals to dominate infrastructure, control the environment. What does it mean to control the environment? To challenge the hegemony of the United States and so on. The anti-American crowd is furious, they're all going crazy and so on. No, we have to fight with the United States. And that's where I say the risk in this whole story lies. You could set up a system like this to strengthen our relationship with China, with India, with other countries, and so on. I think that's great. I have nothing against it. I don't see any problem with having an alternative system to SWIFT, an alternative to the dollar. The more channels you have, the better. I think it's not very efficient. I think it's a poorly made investment. But anyway, it's more investment. It's more alternatives. The more alternatives, the better. The more trade you do, the more wealth is generated in the country, right? Now, what's the problem with this whole story? The problem with this is that it's an initiative with no future, and it's being used, as you can see here, to support the anti-Americans here in Brazil. People are picking more fights with the United States, picking more fights with the West. That's a lost battle, right? The BRICS people love to say no, because BRICS accounts for I don't know how many percent of the population, I don't know how many percent of the land area, and so on. But when you actually look at the wealth, it's much less than that. Yeah. Look, there's a BRICS Pay website here, and it says here GDP 36.7%, but do you know what this is? It's GDP with using purchasing power parity, right? It's what's called PPP, which is a calculation they use to say that, for example, what you earn something here in Brazil isn't the same as earning it in the United States. Things in the United States are more expensive. So, in other words, Brazil's GDP value would increase here because things are cheaper here, right? So it's 36%, which is already little, right, if you consider the whole world. And that's even with PPP. In other words, they're inflating this number because we're poor, right? Just so you can see the loss we would have. We would be giving up 60% of the world's economy. Much more, actually, because Europe, the United States, Australia, the Western world, the civilized world, has way more money than this bunch of countries we're listing here. On this site here, they have a ton of information, I don't know what, very complimentary, talking about sovereignty, sovereignty, sovereignty. Just look at that. Of course, obviously they were going to say that, right? No, because cooperation, so here they're putting the BRICS payment system. It's funny, right? They talk about credit cards and all that. But nowadays, all credit cards use SWIFT, right? Even the Chinese cards, right? Anyway, then they add a bunch more stuff here, but in the end, it's a whole lot of nothing. A bunch of projects, a lot of things that are much more propaganda than anything serious. That's the essence of the BRICS. I've already told you, the BRICS are nothing. It's an illusion. It's just an anti-American propaganda tool, nothing more than that. There's no real commercial cooperation, no real military cooperation, no cooperation of any kind really in the end, right? Brazil, for example, with this dispute with the United States, the BRICS folks they're sending letters of support, messages of support, sure, but in practice, no one is going to do anything. Why? Because no one can afford to pick a fight with the United States. In other words, BRICS is a useless bloc, and all it does is give a platform for those who are anti-American to pick pointless fights with the United States. Does that help us in any way? I'm not saying we should always follow the United States. No, there are things I criticize about the United States as well. I think there are criticisms to be made of the American government, of Europe, of a lot of things. But the question is, does it help Brazil to pick fights with these people? It doesn't help. People here just keep creating these things that are of no practical use. It's the same situation with BRICS and this BRICS Pay they're working on. It's something that goes nowhere, that doesn't offer any advantage at all. BRICS is nothing today and has no chance of becoming anything in the future because, as I explained to you, the member countries are very similar, right? They're not complementary. And China and India, for example, are enemies. There will never actually be a real agreement between China and India in the end. Even India, even China and Russia are both communist and all that, but the truth is they've always had a very strong historical enmity. In other words, BRICS Pay is in the same situation as BRICS. It's propaganda, an illusion that won't lead anywhere, but it's worse than that. Why? Because it could end up distancing us from the West. In other words, it's an initiative that doesn't stand a chance of producing much. It won't go anywhere in the end because the network effect is very strong. No one is going to use this thing, and more than that, it's highly detrimental to Brazil and to business here in Brazil because it's going to create this clash between Lula and Trump and will mess up the Brazilian economy even more going forward. It's an idea that everyone has known since back in '64. Anti-Americanism is the path to communism in Brazil. I hope we don't get to that point here, that it just stays at this kind of bluster that no one really takes seriously. Let's not go beyond that. Thank you for watching the video until the end. Besides liking, sharing and subscribing to the channel, consider becoming a sponsor with contributions starting at just 1.99 reais. Click the join button below to learn about the terms and benefits of sponsoring the channel. For more information about our project, visit our websites shown on the screen.